I'm live. Hey, this is episode one of no, it's not AI like it's 1994. It is the Entrepreneurs um, Tech Entrepreneurs, whatever, podcast, something like that, which is supposed to be 2 minutes. At least it's supposed to be 2 minutes. Anyway, this is just impromptu, as in like stuff to talk about for entrepreneurs, tech-minded entrepreneurs who like tech and have realized, especially like I've been an entrepreneur for 15, almost 15 years, about 12 years, 12 years actually. Been in IT for 20 plus. And part of the reason I became an entrepreneur is because I value very, very highly the integration and the intersection between the two. I don't believe that they can be uh, unseparated. Like if you have a business that like there's some level of technology that like has to be there in order for it to be competitive, like at the top of your. I mean, and now I've found exceptions. Of course, like there's underwater basket weaving that maybe you don't have as many competitors, but realistically, for most people, and that's like the vast majority of people, if you want to be competitive in your industry, especially if you want to be competitive, as in the example of like who's at the top of the top of the top, then like the integration of technology has to be there. So, with that said, we're already at 2 minutes. Um, let's jump in. So, right now, this is a little bit less impromptu. This is actually the makings of an article that I've started for LinkedIn. It's actually more of a post that turned into an article, and now it's kind of evolving because there's a whole lot coming out of it. But anyway, so the whole thing about AI, obviously, it came in, it's a big deal, and I'm looking at it now. So we were about 3 years into it, into like the chat bots and the existence of them and the proliferation into our society. And for the most part, like we can still look around and like, not much has really changed. So one of the things that I've realized is with, so I grew up in like late 80s, early 90s. So back then, I was kind of, my dad was an electrical engineer. And that was back when like PCs were just they were getting faster all the time and literally becoming obsolete within a year or two. So we wound up with this computer graveyard at home, just a bunch of computers that my dad's work was throwing away. Because back then there were no recycling programs. Like when the computers went out, like they either collected dust or went to the dumpster. Nobody knew about landfills and whatever and sustainability. So we wound up with a bunch of those. So back then, I was just playing around with a bunch of computers in my parents' den, and that was pre-internet. Well, pretty much like right at the earliest stages of the internet. The internet was released, at least the World Wide Web was released in '93. So around 94, 95, that was the time where I was kind of tinkering, just building new things, just putting different computers together, putting parts together, playing around with operating systems. And one of the things that I can look back now and see, like we're 3 years past, almost 3 years past the launch of the release of ChatGPT. And like I said, at this point, not much has really changed. However, what really has changed that most people probably don't see is the we're at a different place on that business cycle of opportunity. Um, Alumni Hall. Don't know what that is. Anyway, we're on. a different stage of that cycle, which is pretty much the same stage that we were in 1994. Now, mind you, 1994, that's the same year that Amazon launched. eBay launched the next year. A few years later, Google, Netflix. So um, that was still pretty early on. Like I said, '93 was the launch of the publication making public of the World Wide Web. So there was a lot of time gap in between, like it launching and people coming out of it with real wealth. Like, don't get me wrong, some other companies were in that space too, were launched in that space too, like some we don't talk about anymore, like Netscape, um, Axe Jeeves, who else? Alta Vista, and yet like those were those were pretty big names back then, but they didn't stand the test of time, which is again what this whole thing is right now. Like this whole thing of AI is pretty much exactly like that. In other words, the opportunity is out there for businesses to make changes, to make impact with the technology. Obviously, the technology isn't the thing to be sold. In other words, the people that were, or the businesses that were selling the internet aren't the ones that are sticking around today. Like, obviously, AOL was huge and they are not with us anymore. At least not they're not with us anymore. Uh, the name is still around, but they're not with us. So, um, all that to say, right now, as far as opportunity is concerned, opportunity is in what can we do, like what can we use AI for, like to make some change. So in other words, let's go through a couple of examples. So Amazon made money helping people buy books in a way that they couldn't do it before. Netflix made money in helping people buy movies in the way they hadn't before. Google made money helping people find sites on the internet that people hadn't before. Now don't get me wrong, Axe Jeeves was the premier site. In fact, that when that came out, it was the best of the best. But then Google came out, and theirs with their search engine was even better. And as a result of that, obviously Google took off eventually. For a long time, they didn't directly market um, on their site, but eventually they took off on the marketing platform too, and there was really no catching up to them after they started taking off. So all that said, effectively each one of these companies that we see today that had their start in the internet boom, they made it because they took some existing needs, some existing problems, some existing appetite from the market and found out a better way to deliver it. They didn't go make something new, really. They just used the internet to provide a better service. Walgreens is another example of that, which is why they have, at least part of why they have so much of a competitive advantage against CVS and the other drugstores. And part of the benefit of their story is that they weren't exactly like first mover. They sat and waited. They waited to see, how is this going to work for us? How is this best going to work for us? In other words, they weren't waiting necessarily on the sidelines, just twiddling their thumbs, but they were the whole time trying to figure out how can we make this work for us? They were actively trying to figure out what's going to work for us, what's going to actually be of use. And that is what caused them to produce products that again gave them an upper hand advantage in their industry. So if I'm gonna like condense this into something, yes, a little bit more bite-sized usable. For all of my entrepreneurs out there, I would encourage you not to think of AI as something that like is some kind of appendage over here that does this weird thing, maybe. Neither to think of it as, oh, we can use these good chatbots for customer service, and we can use these chatbots for emails and automatic calendar invites or whatever. But actually begin to think about the problems that you have in your business. And we will probably talk, we're coming back and talk about more about some of the constraints, some of the problems or potential problems with that later. But at least start to try to think out of the box in terms of what problems do I currently have in my business. For startups, what problems do I foresee in launching even today that could potentially be solved by using AI, even if you don't know how? That's the kind of train to start thinking on. Because even again, even if you don't know how, that that can be solved. The biggest issue is finding the what. So again, just like Netflix, I mean, it just takes a little bit. Like it really takes just one good idea to get the ball rolling into something that can be extremely profitable, extremely beneficial, and extremely impactful on for you, on others, on our society. So yeah, that's it for this one. This was fun, and I'm gonna do it again. But signing off, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.